Welcome to the Protego Foundation Book Club. Today we're going to be delving back into Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. This is part 2 of our discussion, so if you missed part 1, go ahead and rewatch that. We discussed a lot of great creatures in there, but we're going to kind of expand a little bit more, go more into the second half of the book. And I figured today we can start off with just a few questions, kind of like a round table. Anyone who wants to respond, just to kind of open up the discussion. So we're not introduced to Patronuses in this book, but we're introduced to kind of more detail about them and like different animals that they can be. So I was just wondering, what is everyone's Patronus, and are you happy with your Patronus? If you've taken the official Patronus quiz. And if you haven't, or if you're unhappy with what you got, what animal would you like to have? I'll start. So mine was a badger, but I'm a Ravenclaw, so I thought that was interesting. So I guess I might have some Hufflepuff inside me. So I thought that was fine. I like badgers. I'm not unhappy with it. Who else?
I honestly can't even remember what mine was supposed to be from the quiz because I just remember that I didn't like it, so I kind of forgot.
Yeah.
But like my friends have always joked about me since grade school that like my Patronus should be a flamingo because I was like always way taller than them. So it's kind of just like, that's my Patronus, and it has been for over a decade.
I think I'd love to have my Patronus take, I think it's Hermione's one step further. I think she has an otter.
Yeah.
But within the mustelid family, I just think it would be fun to have a weasel Patronus.
That's a good one. I think that is an option on there. They have a lot of like obscure animals that you can get, and then they have like different colored animals like for the horses, which I thought was interesting.
Doesn't Tyler have some kind of weasel-esque Patronus?
Doesn't he have like a Pine Martin or something?
Oh no, wait, it starts with an. Oh wait, what?
Pine Martin?
Was that it?
Was that?
I remember I had to look up what it was when you told me.
Maybe.
It's cute.
I took it a couple years ago and I got a Nebulum cat. I think that's pronounced that way. I don't know. They're basically like a fluffy gray cat. Like I could see myself being a cat, just like napping and being snuggly and then like little attack when like just you never know. Yeah, so I think that one works for me. And then I see Nicole, I was gonna say Nicole H, but we have 2 Nicole H's, right? So Wild Rabbit, I always identified as elephant, but it forced me to do more research and I'm now okay with it. And then Polecat for another, Stoat. Nicole
that was what
said.
it was.
That's
Stoat.
what Tyler's, Patronus is a Stoat. And he doesn't like that. I think hawk or eagle or
yeah, that's what he wanted.
Yeah.
What is a stoat? Is a stoat a type of weasel? Is it in the weasel family?
I think like a wild
not
weasel.
A goat.
Yeah.
Wild weasel.
Yeah, it is that. It's like in the weasel category.
Mm-hmm.
They're cute. I don't see anything wrong with them. But
yeah. I always when people talk about their Patronus that they would like to have, or just like their favorite animals, and people say ones that are like carnivores, I kind of like don't know what to think, because it's like the question, like if you were an animal, what type of animal would you want to be? And people always say like an eagle or a wolf or something like that, and I'm like, but then you'd have to like I don't know, hunt. So yeah. I don't think I would pick that, but they're great animals. It's just
I have a girlfriend out here. She's a Hufflepuff, and I call her my Trelawney because she's really into the woo-woo stuff. But she has a deck of cards that talks about different spirit animals, and it borrows a lot from indigenous culture. And it was really interesting too, because the whole thesis there was that I know culturally or colloquially, we tend to say like, oh, blank is my spirit animal, or this is my spirit animal. But the whole thesis is basically that spirit animals are in rotation. It's not like you claim one. They come to you in moments where you need them too. And it was kind of interesting to also apply that to the Patronuses, because I think, doesn't Ron's Patronus evolve over time? I might be making that up, or maybe I'm like mixing it up with a fic I'm reading.
I think Remus's Patronus, or no, Tonks's Patronus changes, doesn't
Yes.
I think so.
it?
Yeah. Hers
She just
changes
has
in
a
the beginning
Lupin.
of the sixth.
Yeah, from something to a wolf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of Lupin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine either James or Lily and Snape, that might happen. Just
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
down
I
the
wonder
road,
what
'cause-
Snape's was like, if his was always the deer.
it might have been
Interesting.
just because he knew Lily Like-
That's true.
before he formed a Patronus. But I wonder if Lily's changed to match James, because
Good
that would be kind of ironic, right? If they both happen to have deer.
Yeah, we don't know hers, do we?
I'm pretty sure it's a doe, isn't it?
Is it?
No,
Yeah,
I
I'm
thought
really bad on,
Snape's
like,
is the same as hers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Snape's is a doe because hers is a doe.
Right.
Lily's is a dog.
Oh, okay.
I thought, yeah.
I'm really bad on book trivia, so I'm just gonna like put that out there now.
You're good.
I think
We haven't gotten to that.
I had to go and hunt around for, you see that the Potter group throw around the phrase always, always this, t-shirts that say always. So I said, okay, I've read the books. Where's the always coming from? And I found two significant places where the word always is used. And actually just today I heard a third one. One is, I think Dumbledore asks Snape about his Patronus, and he says his Patronus, and he says, wait, your Patronus has been the same as Lily's? Even after all these years, and Snape looks at Dumbledore and says, always. So that was one time. And I think in the final book, it's the final book, when Harry's talking to his mom, or a representation of his mom, he says, will you be with me? And I think she says, always. So I think, obviously the word always is being used for love, these people will always love this person and always have that manifestation, whether it's the Patronus being a doe or be with him at all times. And I think even today, listening to Order of the Phoenix, there was another turn when the phrase came up, but it wasn't a very happy use of the word always. It was a little darker. I'm not sure. I guess somebody could go through and do a word search on all 7 books and find every reference to the word always, if you really wanted to get serious.
I like that idea. Maybe we should do that, and then in the next book club we can talk about that. I like that.
Yeah. That's such a good point.
There are a lot of repeating words, phrases, and everything in the books, and I feel like a lot of times it's per book that I've noticed, at least this time going through. I haven't really seen anything significant, but in Goblet of Fire, I noticed everyone kept saying "oh" like before their sentences in the dialogue. They'd be like, "oh, blah blah blah," and they had never said that before, and I was like, why is everyone suddenly saying this? So I think the author just I don't know what she was doing with that. But the question was asked, are there any magical creature Patronuses? Yes. I know there's a dragon, there's Phoenix, and I'm jealous of everyone who has those because that's cool. But
that just reminds me of I don't know if any of you watch the Try Guys, but they did an episode where they all did the Pottermore quiz of what Patronuses they would get, and one of them got a dragon, and that's really rare.
yeah.
But I think I agree with you, Valerie. I wouldn't really want to be a carnivorous creature. It would be that doesn't match up with me very well.
Yeah. I mean, as a Patronus, I think it's fine because they don't actually eat anything. But if you were going to be an animal, I would have a hard time with that. Okay. Moving on. Next question. Who's your favorite character at this point in the series, and has it changed since the beginning of the series? I don't know if anyone's been really thinking about that, but I have, because every time someone asks me who my favorite character is, I think it's Harry, but then I'm like, wait, but I really like Hermione, and I don't know. So I've been paying attention throughout the whole time. And it's still those two for me. I think it has to be Harry just because of everything he goes through, and I can't help it. And I just like really sympathize for him. But then Hermione has her great moments too. So she's my
So when you were younger though, was Harry on your radar for favorite character? I feel like Harry is no one's favorite character when you're
I
growing
think
up.
he was, and it could just be
Really?
because I'm like simple-minded or something, and it's just because you spend the most time with Harry. But I don't know. Yeah, I think it's always been Harry.
Always.
Always.
Interesting.
I think when I was younger, it was definitely Hermione. But after doing this reread, because this is like the first time I've read the books in quite a long time, I think, I mean, I still like her, but I don't like identify with her as much anymore. I think Neville or Luna have got to be like my new favorite characters
Yeah.
from like an adult perspective.
Yeah. Everybody, I feel like a lot of people say Luna, and she didn't used to like, I always liked her, but this time around I really like her a lot more. So
Yeah, and I'm really tempted to say like Neville is my favorite character, because like I feel like he never does anything that like I disagree with or that makes me like dislike him as a character. Like he's such a good kid.
I can agree with that. I mean, even Hermione, she has her moments where I'm like, wow, Hermione, stop. Like you're too much.
Yeah.
Well, if I can be a little outside the box, I was thinking about favorite character in the books. And I think I actually love all the peripheral characters that you see only once in a blue moon, the small characters, in that they're so rich. And then some of her supplementary books, I think they're only out as ebooks, like a history of a completely inaccurate history of Hogwarts or whatever it is. You can get this tiny little book, and it goes to give the background of McGonagall's. You want to know McGonagall's love life? I mean, you want to know this stuff. This is all J.K. Rowling stuff, and it's very fascinating. But I guess my favorite character, bizarrely enough, is in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Draco Malfoy. And I don't know if people have seen that, but his character, seeing him as an adult and what goes on, and I don't want to drop anything for people who haven't seen the play, is like, wow, what an interesting person to see, this absolute jerk who starts to evolve, and you start to see a person evolving there as you go through this, especially the 7th and 8th stories, or 6th and 7th stories, and then you see him in the play as an adult, and you realize what a lot of crap this guy had to go through. I mean, what a lot of horrible things happened in his life, even though he was a horrible person for much of it. So he makes me very interested, because I think I'm not always a perfect person either. and it's neat to see that Draco Malfoy can make some course changes. So.
I think if you saw a lot of people smiling, I know Lydia started laughing, and like everyone knows Draco's my favorite character. And for like, not so much I kind of pretend that Cursed Child doesn't exist. Like I read it the night it came out, and then I was like, okay, I want to see it in theater, and like I know it'll be a different experience but I think because we didn't get that redemption arc that, you know, like you said, in 6 and 7 we started kind of seeing like the backstory of like Draco and like his family, and just how he was like born into this family that didn't give him a lot of choices, and like Snape gets this like redemption arc, and like I have a lot of feelings we all have about that, but like Draco, we didn't really get that, and he was a child, and I think that there's so much that we don't know about like his adulthood and all of that I think he's a really fascinating character. He's definitely my favorite.
Not just because you have really, 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 really blonde hair.
Yeah, that helps. And I'm Slytherin, and we're friends in my head. But yeah, and then Lydia says, and in a story about choice, Draco's lack of it growing up means a lot. So yeah, I mean, and then, you know, I won't get into like my whole Draco Harry ship thing, but like when you compare like these two characters, like Harry has a very little choice coming from, you know, for his first 11 years, you know, he doesn't have much of a choice at all because he's living where he is. And then he's kind of used as a pawn for like, you know, the good side. And then Draco is kind of used as a pawn and doesn't have a lot of choice for like the bad side. And it's just really interesting to see these two characters who we see as the, you know, the protagonist and the antagonist, kind of two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you there.
If I was going to summarize Harry Potter and the Cursed Child in one word, what is it about? I would say baggage. And I really think about every single character in that play is dealing with an enormous amount of baggage. The young ones, the old ones, it's an amazing amount of baggage. And watching them work through the baggage and still having a fun time is a neat bit of work.
I feel like that's also accurate for the first 7 books too. Like baggage, the series.
Very
I mean, Harry's got a lot of it, and at first he doesn't realize that, but then he's like, "Oh wow, a lot has happened in my life that I didn't know about, and now I've got to carry it around with me."
And the opposite, least favorite character, I feel like everyone might agree that it's Umbridge, at least in this book. I mean,
Yeah, for me,
I
it's
actually-
definitely Umbridge.
I love this book because every time I've read it beforehand, I just remember like I wanted to just throw the book at the wall because it's so frustrating. Like Umbridge is so horrible, and it just it would really affect me. This time not as much, but I really love how she's written just because it can like evoke so many emotions and like get you so riled up. I think it's really well done. So
I actually like this book is very not traumatizing, but it brings up a lot for me because of Umbridge, because that character actually reminded me a lot of a teacher that I had in high school.
really,
And so like every time I would read this book or watch the movie, I'd be like, the resemblance is just uncanny, even down to like the quote, "I hate children." Like my teacher literally said that one time, and I was like, "Oh my God, she's Umbridge in real life."
you know, I mean, I wouldn't go so far to say that the teacher I had was like Umbridge, but I similarly, like I had the same teacher for 4 years for one of my classes, and she really did hate children. And she would make me cry, and I had like nightmares about her for years after high school. She traumatized me. So,
Yeah. Although I think Umbridge definitely is like a bit worse. She's like her hatred is
Yeah.
more heightened than the people that I know in real life.
That's good because
So
I would
at
be
least
pretty concerned otherwise.
yeah.
It's interesting, Valerie, hearing you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but saying that you hated her a little bit less this time around. This is my first time rereading the series since pursuing a vegan lifestyle. And while she was always so freaking hateable in my mind over the past few times I've read this book in particular, now seeing it with the overt speciesism that she brings to her curriculum and her everyday ethos just had my blood pressure going up in a way it did not happen in the past. And yes, very awesome like arc with her towards the end as she stepped into the Forbidden Forest. But I don't know, maybe it's because like you're very forgiving, Valerie, and I'm less forgiving in that sense. But my God, the hatred I felt for her, I did not know it could be taught from the last time I read this book.
Oh man. Wow. I think for me, I just was like, I've been so affected by her in the past that I was expecting that. But I think now that I'm older, I can just kind of like handle it a little better. Like, I don't know.
And it actually like that thought that you just put out there makes a lot of sense. Like when I was reading it as a kid, like Harry's dealings with Umbridge and him not wanting to like bring other teachers into like his squabbles with her and not, you know, tell them that she's like basically physically abusing him. Like that made sense to me as a kid. But like as an adult, I'm like, wait, there are so many things that he could have done to like check Umbridge's power. But like as a kid, you don't realize that. When Harry was a kid, he didn't, you know, he was putting on a brave face because he thinks, oh, that's what you do. That's what you need to do to deal with people like this. So it's definitely like a different perspective reading it both as an adult and as someone who is very anti-speciesist. Like it's a new experience, I guess.
As the old dude here, and seeing that all of you probably are about half my age, I have to ask a question, which I think comes up along when you talk about Harry not wanting to tell that he didn't want to give Umbridge the satisfaction of going to McGonagall or Dumbledore, that he was being tortured. And so much of these books are adults created this horrible situation, Voldemort, et cetera, and Ron and Hermione and Harry, of course, were all thrust into this nasty situation. And when they turn to the adults, sometimes the adults are there to help them, and sometimes the adults aren't. And so they're the ones that have to get on the stupid thestrals and fly all the way down there because they can't get any grown up to help them. And they end up making mistakes, but they have to deal with this. And I'm sorry, I almost imagine Greta Thunberg sitting on a thestral and going down there because she's talking about, yo, adults, you have screwed this up and you're not fixing it. So we have to. And seeing a bunch of young faces here, I almost kind of get, feel guilty as, my generation has contributed to this mess. And the Protego Foundation and so many other groups are trying to address it. And you shouldn't have to. You should just be able to enjoy the Harry Potter novels because they're fun novels and not think that the world is suffering because of, a century or more of abuse. But you're left with it. So has anybody else looked at Harry Potter from the perspective of age, of the kids having to go and deal with the issues because the grown-ups aren't?
That's
Wow.
such a good point.
Yeah, that was amazing. My first thought was don't feel guilty because you're here and you are helping, and it's not your fault that the world is the way it is.
I still feel guilty. Maybe it's not enough. I mean, that's the point, is how much is enough? If it hasn't been fixed, then it's not enough. And sometimes you hear Harry and the guys doing about this. Okay, well, we're doing what we can, but it's not enough. It's not fixed. Voldemort is still out there, Umbridge is still doing bad things, whatever. I don't know, sorry, but I appreciate your comment.
Well, that's the great thing about Harry Potter is, in the end, good does triumph over evil. And I think that, I'm sure in every generation there have been stories similar to Harry Potter where that's the theme and it kind of gives you hope. And humanity, I feel like, really connects with that theme. So, and I do feel like our generation, there are more vegans than there ever have been, and people just, the world is becoming more and more aware of these things. And I would say that things like Harry Potter contributed to our mindset. Despite whatever might have happened recently with the author, like there are themes in this book of, not being a speciesist or racist like Umbridge. Like she's depicted as a horrible person, and those things only help that. So we grew up reading that and understanding all of them. So
Yeah, you look at like all of the, and then Lydia, I think your hand was up. I don't know if did you want to go first? Okay. So you look at like all of the big books and movies and things that have really blown up in the last, 10, 15 years or something. And all of these, it's kind of wild to say 10, 15 years, but if you look at like Hunger Games and like Divergent and, all of these big YA sort of fantasy dystopian stuff, is all about kids coming together to solve a problem and to fight back against like a government that's run by adults, or a government, that has crumbled, but it's this, they're resistance texts. And if you look at it, it's identifying a problem and saying, we were handed this, like the Harry Potter and like his friends, like this generation, they were handed a war that didn't belong to them. They were born into something that like wasn't created by them. And so this whole coming together to fight these bigger powers and stuff, it's a really common thread. And I think that it's cool to see, so much of that in, movies and TV shows and everything that are geared toward, or they're like created for this generation, millennials or Gen Z. Mostly I feel like a lot of it was like millennial sort of culture, but just to show that we can fight back and we can question authority and we can make a difference, and it is, we have the ability and we have the choices, like we can make those choices to do that. So that's what my tattoo says. It is our choices.
I think the great thing about series like Harry Potter, or Divergent or Hunger Games is that when adults read them or watch the films, they can also see that actually kids can create change. They have things that are worth hearing. And so like that sort of thinking that, oh, maybe we should listen to our kids can sort of be like amplified in the real world through adults viewing these entertainment media things as well.
Another interesting bit that I think of Harry's success, you were saying Harry does succeed in the end. And part of his success, just to bring this back to animals, is because he has empathy for non-humans, both intelligent races. The goblin, I think it was Grip who says, Harry Potter, you treat goblins differently than other people do. And I think that's in the last book. Same thing with he bowed to Buckbeak, and Draco Malfoy didn't bow to Buckbeak. So he respected others. He'd been abused as a kid, obviously, but he also just seemed to have a certain decency in him. And his decency did not stop at humanity. It included other creatures and his kindness. And I think that's a great example that the hero doesn't succeed by just, solo-mindingly blasting through the bad guys and kicking everybody's butt. It's because he builds allies by being a good person. And that's not explicit, but I think it comes out there and you see that Harry Potter's that way. Even if he didn't join Spew, like Hermione wanted him to, he was still relatively good.
Right.
It's
SPEW.
SPEW.
And certainly you see that with Dobby. He was very decent to Dobby, and he always respected Dobby and was good to Dobby as a servant. So I think you're having human to human issues or human to creatures that are subhuman. At some point, I have a question, and maybe you covered. I didn't realize you'd done Order of the Phoenix, and this is part 2. But I was taking notes, and as I was taking notes, reading this, I really wanted to ask this group of people about some things that really disturbed me in reading Order of the Phoenix. And they probably always disturb me a little bit, but I'm a magician. I'm an environmental magician. So you always want to think about, okay, if I make something appear or disappear or change color, you can just do it. But ideally, why? In your theory of magic, why did that happen? Because I'm powerful, or because I used a potion, or because I asked God, or whatever it is. So when McGonagall is teaching them transfiguration and they're making creatures disappear, where are they going? Did they die? Did they just go out of existence? Or if they're making things appear and disappear, like turning a teacup into a mouse or mouse into a teacup, and Ron does it half and you only get a little tail? At its worst, it makes me think of the horrible lab experiments that might be going on with people genetically engineering things, and they're not one creature and they're not another. They're a horrible, unhappy hybrid. But I mean, what are your thoughts about this? I don't know whether the authors ever said anything about, it's not really a mouse. If somebody waves their wand and a mouse appears, it's not a real mouse. It's an illusion of a mouse or something like that. Or the mouse is summoned from some other place and appears here, and that's why the mouse. It's a real mouse. But if they, like when Hermione gets kicked off at Ron and with a pugno, sends the bird zooping at her, at least in the movie, the birds go splat, 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 splat up against the wall. Were those real birds? And then other issues, there's live fairies on the Christmas tree. Live fairies?
Yeah.
Means somebody basically enchanted the Christmas tree and stuck the live fairies there and they have no choice. Are they happy being there? I mean, there's a lot of animal rights issues that are going on. And I feel the author, although she is conscious generally of these issues, in some areas just kind of dismisses them as, the cat disappeared, or it was just a half a cat. I'm like, what? I'm sorry. So maybe you've discussed this before, but it just shocked me when I started to think about it from a Protego perspective.
Yeah, we have touched on this in the past before. We've speculated because I don't think the author has necessarily said for sure what happens. Although Nicole's saying there's a line where vanished objects go, which I'm assuming translates to vanished creatures as well. Yeah, what is that line? I don't remember.
Yeah.
But
basically that vanished objects go into non-being, which basically it's one of those ones where it's like, it's like a cyclical thing. So it's into non-being, which is to say everything. It was the answer to the riddle for the Ravenclaw common room. So
Okay.
Well, I think we're gonna
I
have.
should know that.
I think we're gonna have an episode of Protego Cast next season where we talk about sentience, and we're gonna talk about this a lot. And we've touched on sentience in other book clubs and other chats and stuff that we've had on for Protego. But we're gonna talk about like the Whomping Willow and talk about mandrakes and talk about animals that were, or a desk that was transformed into an animal and then back into did the desk have a consciousness first and then it was transferred to the animal, or is the animal kind of like an automaton or like a something like that doesn't so it's a really big conversation, because I don't think we're given the answers. And we can hope that the animals aren't conscious of what's happening to them, or at least don't feel any kind of pain or transfiguration, but I don't think there's no clear answer on that. So
I mean, I think we've talked before about animals using transfiguration, that like if they started as an animal, they may like continue having that animal's consciousness as an inanimate object, because I think there was one animal that they like turned into a pincushion, and like when they turned it back into I think it was a hedgehog, they turned it into a pincushion, and when they turned it back into a hedgehog, it would like curl up in fright whenever someone approached it with a pin. So I think in that case, like they definitely have the consciousness still, even like as the inanimate object. But, and I think Tyler has more opinions on this actually. I think we've talked about this before, about how it may be different when like an inanimate object is transformed into an animal, because maybe that object didn't have a consciousness before it became an animal. But then it's like, does it now have a consciousness since it's now an animal? Like there's not really any clear answers, but yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm so glad to hear other people's perspectives on it, and that this has been perhaps a troubling issue for other people as well.
Oh yeah. No,
in some ways it's just, I mean, when I just enjoying the book, it's just funny. I go, ha, that's funny. That's really the back and forth, and that it would do this. And then you kind of go, that kind of makes me think it's funny when people jab the dancing bear. Ha ha ha! The bear is being jabbed and it's growling in pain. I don't know if that's funny anymore. After if you're woke or whatever you want to say,
for sure. And you mentioned the author being like aware of issues, but I really don't think she really cares about animals, because she's not. I don't think she wrote the books with so many animal like uses, and in potions, every class it's like animal testing, it's cut up animal pieces that they're using, very not vegan friendly at Hogwarts. And I think she was just kind of decorating the story because all of the magical creatures just make it seem more magical. Plus a lot of it is rooted in like witchcraft historically, and like brewing potions. I mean, she didn't come up with that. That's a thing that's been around. So but there are definitely plenty of times in the books where it's you miss it if you're not looking for it like we are, and it's just like the toads that they're trying to do spells on or trying to hop away, and like Ron accidentally pokes one in the eye and he screams and jumps off the desk and everything like that. So there are like so many instances of animal abuse that you just don't even think about normally. Like anytime I've read these books in the past, I didn't think much of it, but now there are so many things that are very disturbing to me. So
sorry to be a downer, but I really wanted to hear what people thought about that.
Oh no, you're not
for
being a
sure.
downer.
We're always up to talk about that topic.
It's great when people like the realization that you were just describing that you had, like, oh, you used to think that was funny, but now you don't. That's what we're trying to get people to do, is think more about what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're reading, and thinking, is this right or wrong? So, I mean, these books were written a long time ago. So I always wonder that if they were written now in modern day, how they would differ, if they would differ. So yeah, kind of along that same line. because there's so much of an emphasis on using animals at Hogwarts, do you think personally you would enjoy going to Hogwarts? Because we, on a broad sense, of course, we want to go to Hogwarts. We wish that we could go there. But now looking at all the details and what you would be forced to do in class, especially potions for me, it's kind of like when you have to dissect a frog in school. And a lot of people have an issue with that. Some just kind of sit through it. Others will say, hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And I'm pretty sure teachers are required to offer a different assignment, an alternate. I remember doing that in science class, but it's like in potions class, you can't do that every day. That's just the class. So would you enjoy Hogwarts? And do you think that the students would be able to change the way that these classes are taught? Because it's like, at least for transfiguration and charms, like you don't have to be transfiguring a snail, right? Or like Hermione eventually, it says she moves on to kittens for a vanishing spell. Why do you have to use that? Why can't you just use like a cup or some inanimate object, right? Like, why does it have to be animals? So anyway, the question is, do you think you would enjoy going to Hogwarts? And what do you think would be the most effective way for students to advocate for change? Do you think it would be through petitions or clubs, which we do see in the series, but do you think that would actually be effective?
I think Nicole, you put your hand up first, and then Lydia, so you can go in that order.
I think like I still would, because for the one hand, like you also can do a lot more good for like the magic, you know, for like magical creatures and all that, like after doing that, after like going to Hogwarts, because from what we can tell is there's not really a homeschool option of wizard school. Like we hear about other wizards, there are other wizard schools mentioned, but based off this like what we know about Beaboxen and them, like it doesn't sound like they'd be any different in terms of like the animal ness of how they use their courses. So you basically have to go to that type of school if you want to exist in that world. And I think once you go through that system, one, you can, while going through it, you can do a lot more to sort of advocate for more options through a combination of things like like discussions with the teacher, having options to maybe less, you know, probably less so in potions, but for things like transfiguration, like you can, like they do things on different like creatures. You could probably suggest doing things on different objects instead, and sort of starting at like the inanimate, you know, depending on how the whole sentience of transfigured objects things work. You could sort of do the, hey, I'd rather transfigure this block of wood into creature, into different creature, and then it's still like a block of wood deep inside, and then it could go back to block of wood, and you did not have to traumatize real creature. You traumatize block of wood. So you can do, so potentially advocating for things like that, which also would probably be easier because then you don't have creatures that you have to take care of between classes. You just have blocks of wood, which require significantly less maintenance than living beings. So yeah, you can advocate for things like that. Once you graduate wizard school, you can then sort of try and like get work in the government and potentially advocate for larger scale change at that point in your life.
I love that.
I think that's and what you're saying, Nicole, has some ground truthing in it. I working in the environmental field, there's a lot of work to sort of change the ways things are done. For instance, carpets are generally very, very toxic. The carpets underneath your feet generally have lots of very, very bad chemicals in them, and they're poisonous. They're horrible. And when one carpet manufacturer 25 or so years ago realized this, he went to his engineers and said, how many non-toxic chemicals do we have? And they said, like 4. And he said, okay, we're going to start making our carpets with those 4 chemicals. And so, at first people said that's impossible. You can't do it. You can't switch away from the traditional things, the toxic chemicals. You have to use the toxic. But he was able to launch a whole new revolution in making carpets because he dared to think we don't have to do it the way we used to. And I can imagine somebody kind of like Newt Scamander going into potions class and getting all ticked off when he was told you have to chop up this baby owl and put it into the potion in order to make this seeing in the dark potion. And he says, I don't think we have to. I think there's another way to do it. And being that person failing for years, but eventually coming up with essentially vegan potion making or other ways to do similar things, but not in the traditional way, because the traditional way thought that's the only way you can do it. And somebody's going to come and say, no, that's not. So I'm hoping that we can see that, or we could see that if there was going to be a second round of Harry Potter novels. So Nicole's going to be the main character in the second round of Harry Potter novels, right, Nicole?
Lydia, did you still want to say something, or I can go off of it if you didn't want to, but
yeah, both of you covered most of what I was going to say. Like, I completely agree. Like, you always have to be in a society that eats and uses and harms animals, but like, it's how you handle that and what you can make out of that is most important. And like, I don't honestly see being at Hogwarts in that respect to be that different from being in the Muggle world now, because we still do walk by like hot dog stands outside and stuff like that. And we're like not actively participating in it, but it still exists in the world around us. And like, also, there have to be vegans and vegetarians at Hogwarts, right? Like, just because they're not in the canon doesn't mean that they're not there. So they must exist. Because like, if Hermione can start spew, then something must be going on with other animal rights stuff.
Is there not, for people who read fan fiction, is there not a whole like fan fiction genre about vegans at Hogwarts? Because we should make it.
I've only come across like 2 or 3 fanfics without looking for them that have like veganism in it, and it's usually like on some homestead that like Luna and Ginny have or something, and it's like they were like eating tofu scramble, and it's just kind of like casual, I guess. But there was some a fic that I read once where it wasn't a vegan fic, and it wasn't like making the potions into vegan potions. But I forget exactly what happened, but I think it was Draco was a potioneer or something, and he was trying to recreate potions without having the needed ingredients. And so he looked at the sort of, and I think I've mentioned this in another book club, and I'll probably mention it in the Protego episode, the Protego cast episode that we're going to talk about this. But he took like some kind of ingredient that had the same acidity as, let's say, like I don't know, frog's lung, or I don't know, like what is used in these potions, or the same, same kind of key elements in the chemical composition and stuff. And then he replaced it with something that he did have. And I feel like that's very similar to a lot of times when like we're doing vegan cooking, and it's like, you need 2 eggs for this brownie recipe. And you're like, okay, then I'll use, this much flaxseed and this much water, or I'll use, this egg replacer. And I feel like it can be done if like the chemical composition is the same. So there are options out there. I think that we could veganize a lot of the potions and, the food and stuff at Hogwarts. I think it could be done. But there's a fanfic where that happens. And then I kind of took that idea for a fic that I'm writing and like made all the potions like vegan because of all of that. So it's, So,
oh my gosh, you have to share that with me, because I would love to just like have on our website like all of the potions, but veganized.
Is there a cookbook or a site that features vegan Harry Potter recipes? I mean, there's lots of Harry Potter cookbooks, and you can certainly make your own substitutions. But if it doesn't exist, what a wonderful project for Protego is to source out and put out there, hey, submit your favorite vegan Harry Potter recipes, and you guys could vet them, put them together, and make that something. And then if people wanted a print copy, they donate $50 to Protego, and you sent them a print copy. I don't know. I'm just saying it's a way to get the word out there and have some really good food at the same time.
Yeah, well, we actually, Nicole mentioned Magical Food Department. We actually do collaborate with her a little bit. She's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so go find Magical Food Department on Instagram. And she actually did like an exclusive blog recipe for us. That was like, I think it was like vegan butterfly bubble tea.
It was
or something like that.
Akami bubble tea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a thing. As far as I know, there isn't like a book yet. I'm gonna say yet. There isn't one. But maybe there will be in the future.
Yeah. We definitely have some on our website and we would love to do more. So
yeah.
Feel free to ever send them in if you want to. Yeah. For sure. It's a great idea. I'm glad that there are people interested in that.
Yeah. But speaking to what Allie was talking about with like plant-based potions and everything, I was actually like pleasantly surprised. There was a panel for Comic-Con at Home last year talking about potion ingredients in different magical entertainment properties. And when I saw that the panel was happening, I was like, oh no, they're going to talk about animal ingredients, aren't they? But like, the person who was like the guest on the panel and who's like an actual naturopathic doctor, all of the ingredients that she talked about for her remedies were plant-based. So like historically speaking, there have been tons and tons of elixirs and potions and medicines that have been made just with plants. So I think it'd be really easy for Hogwarts to have even just a class on plant-based potions, like even if they weren't going to go all the way to having like no animal ingredients. But I feel like also, I mean, the series takes place in the 90s and animal rights really hadn't hit its heyday at that point. And I feel like if we were to look at the curriculum that they would have nowadays, it would probably be very different. And they might have different options for people who want to transfigure, but not, deal in animal experimentation, basically. Because, I mean, a lot of schools are now open to that in terms of like, biology classes, letting people not have to dissect animals to pass the class. So I feel like there probably will be more options for students who wanted to be vegan fully and not have to harm animals in their education.
Yeah, and a lot of the things that they do, it's like aren't necessarily like necessary, especially because muggles get along fine without any of this magic stuff, right? Like I don't need to turn a kitten into, or like I don't need to banish this kitten. What's the point of it?
Yeah.
Or like turn a desk into a rat. Like I don't think I'm ever going to need to do that in my life. So, but I definitely like the idea of alternate items. I don't think teachers would have an issue with that, especially Flitwick and McGonagall. McGonagall might take a little convincing, but I think she would get it.
Remember there was at some point they're talking about how, and maybe this was creation versus vanishing, that it was easier to do a simpler creature than it was to do a more complicated creature. So if you were going to do a snail, that was not too bad. And Ron and Harry are still working on the snail, but Hermione was all the way up to kittens because she was so advanced. And so there's a complexity. And so it shows you that at least there's a little bit of respect for the complexity of a living creature. But I think the sensitivity to it actually being a living creature was not there, which it is kind of an interesting to look at Harry Potter being an artifact. I mean, that, like you were saying, they were written in the 90s. It's already an artifact of its time, that the author is about my age. And that because it was funny having cats appear or disappear, or maybe they partially disappear and their tail is still there, was funny, was kind of stock in trade. Haha, if you were at a wizarding school, that kind of funny thing would happen. And so we can still love aspects of it, and yet we can still also look at the story and say that's really kind of dated, and actually I have to say it's a little sad that it's dated for this crowd, but it's not dated for, I would say, the average American or the average Brit, because I think for them, vegan issues and that concern for living beings isn't standard. It's more standard than it was, but it's not the standard at this point. So it's an artifact.
Yeah. In a way, it's a good thing, though, if we're already seeing it be dated. And I think that the Fantastic Beasts films are kind of proof of that, too, because the main character
100%.
is defending creatures. Like, he's about saving and rescuing and, like, giving them sanctuary. And I think that is fantastic.
Yeah, those are more of an accurate representation, I think, of like popular thinking surrounding animal rights. So it does show like how far depictions of that in entertainment have come in just 20 years.
Mm-hmm. So if we went to Hogwarts, we would graduate, and then we maybe would found a vegan, I like the idea of an all vegan magical school, and everyone from all around the world is invited to come.
Hey, that's a thing. Like there are specialized vegan like schools in the US. So like maybe that is a thing that could happen.
It would be really interesting to imagine what that would be. This is actually very fun. And also the building, although I love castles, absolutely love castles. If you were going to build a new building, what kind of sustainable architecture would be really cool that you could build with magic, that isn't torturously destroying the land. I mean, obviously it's taking up some space, but there's different ways to build buildings. So I think that's really wonderful to reimagine if you were going to build a Hogwarts now. And the potions class would be different. The food that was being served would be different. There'd be so many different things that would be considered in terms of how Hogwarts was being run, in terms of whether the house elves were being paid a fair wage or under servitude or not. That's kind of fun. That's a neat idea.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't plan on making a vegan magic school, but when I move to Scotland at some point, I want to, I'm going to have like an Airbnb, like a vegan Airbnb, maybe that's like Harry Potter themed with like a turkey sanctuary and like site and everything. Like that's my plan. So feel free, everyone, you get 3 nights free stay if you mention this book club.
I'm gonna hold you to that.
Go for it.
We're all gonna show up.
Perfect. Please do.
That sounds fantastic. I think I just like first of all, I love castles, so I would want it to be a castle, but maybe they could find like a ruins of an old castle and build that back up with like, don't use any new materials. I know we've talked about like enlargement charms and stuff, but I don't know if that lasts forever. But I was thinking you could take like little stones and make them bigger. But I love the idea of just kind of, because you have all of these protective spells around the school and like muggles can't even see it, having it be kind of like a conservatory or like including like this massive forest around it or something that muggles can't get to, and so it'd be like a sanctuary for animals as well. I like that idea.
Well, that's what the Forbidden Forest should be anyways.
Yeah, which
like
it kind
like
of
the diversity of creatures in there is just beyond, I think, what most of the wizarding world is used to.
Yeah, and they just say like students aren't allowed to go in the forest and like nobody go in there and mess with anybody, even though they go in there a lot. But and then Hagrid brings like a giant who destroys it a little bit. But before we move on, the name Plantwarts was thrown out there as a potential name for this school. So if anyone has any like other good name ideas.
What was the name?
Plantwarts. Instead of Hogwarts, because even that's animal. Hog. Yeah. Okay, well that's a fun idea. So I wanted to bring up, there's a quote from Hermione And it was when they first see Grawp in the forest. And Harry has not really comprehended like what he's looking at yet. And Hermione asks Hagrid, who is he? And they take the time to write out that Harry was confused. Like he thought that was a weird way to phrase things. And he was going to say, what is it? And I was like, that applies so much to what we've talked about with language. Not calling animals it. And I just thought that was fascinating that that was in there. And I never would have noticed unless we had our previous talks about that. So I don't know. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. I feel like I've noticed whenever a character is written about that we as the reader are meant to like bond with, for the most part, the author would use he or she or who. But if it's like an animal or a creature that either we don't see very often or in a very speciesist way, maybe the author doesn't consider them as worthy of having like their own like identity, that's when I tend to see it used a lot. Because I'm pretty sure Hedwig is never referred to as it.
Right.
So.
Definitely. But yeah, just the fact that it was pointed out like that he would literally have structured the sentence differently. But now, like anytime anyone refers to an animal as it, I'm like, mm-mm.
Yeah. At the very least, use they if you don't know like
they.
So
yeah. Or just say like, who is it? You know, like I don't know, who, saying who instead of what.
Yeah.
Anyway, Hermione said that, but on the contrary, she also said something that really bothered me. It was when Parvati was talking to her about centaurs and about how attractive they were. And Hermione was like, I never really liked horses. And then Parvati said he was gorgeous, and Hermione said either way he's still got 4 legs, like as if like anyone with 4 legs is like whatever, I don't care.
And this is why like Hermione slowly became not my favorite character.
Yeah, she's very flawed.
She does very contradictory things and makes like very contradictory statements. Like one page you think she's very like all about equality for all the species, and then on the next page she'll say something degrading like that.
Yeah. I think sorry.
No, that's basically what I wanted to say.
I was just gonna say a lot of that I think comes from the author trying to make her like not like other girls, but then also make her this like bossy sort of like annoying character. And I don't think she like ever decided where she wanted Hermione to stand. And she's very like, you know, girl, like femme-phobic sort of, and like doesn't. I think her female characterization is just like really off. Yeah,
Lydia, you put that well.
Yeah.
Definitely strong, not like other girls at energy. Yeah.
I mean, it does seem like she's mainly concerned with the beings or basically any species that walks on 2 legs at least, like the elves, werewolves, and now giants. So, yeah, since we're kind of talking about giants and centaurs, does anyone have any other thoughts from what they read?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I think like when I first read the what is it? I don't like horse. I've never liked horses or whatever Hermione says. I was like, that doesn't sound like how Hermione would talk. Like that doesn't seem like something she would say. She's supposed to be like this highly intelligent character who has like a breadth and depth of knowledge of everything in the magical world. But I also think it is probably in part due to the fact that the centaurs live in the Forbidden Forest, which is like such a fascinating place to me. And like every time it pops up in the books, I'm like, oh my gosh, symbolism. And Harry goes there in almost every book, if I don't think every book, but almost every book. And it's just like, it represents this, or it is this place that is kind of, it functions as like a repository for lost and hidden and secretive things and creatures. Like the resurrection stone is dropped there and buried. Barty Crouch Jr. buries his father as a bone there, which is like super like mythical and biblical and all that kind of stuff. And then I mean, it's called the Forbidden Forest, but like I think it says a lot about how the humans in Harry Potter think about other species, because they're kind of just like, oh, we'll just cast them into this forest and not allow like our young children near them because we're not interested in understanding them. And like Hagrid, as problematic as he is as a character, as we've discussed in past book clubs, like is the only one who really attempts to make even the slightest connection with creatures in the Forbidden Forest. I mean, I guess Dumbledore a little bit, but I don't know. I just find the forest like really intriguing a place.
Definitely. And just one more thought about Hermione, like I don't know if she's just matured or if again it's a speciesist thing, but Lockhart, she's like swooning over Lockhart, and so are all of the other girls. But now it seems like because the other girls are swooning over him, she wants to like be like, no, I don't want anything to do with that, which is weird. So anything else about the centaurs or the giants or the Forbidden Forest? I love everything you just said, Lydia.
I mean, it's sort of related to the Forbidden Forest, but I would love to talk more about the Thestrals, because they did come up both in our last meeting and earlier when we were talking about, kids having to basically solve problems that the adults had left behind, and so they got on the Thestrals and went to London, etc. So yeah, that's like I think what you were saying about like the Forbidden Forest being kind of like where people are like, okay, these creatures are out of sight, out of mind. I feel like that's particularly applicable for the Thestrals because there's like such that like mythology around them where people are like superstitious and scared of them. Because like either you can't see them or you can see them for a very like dark reason. And then I mean, their appearance is not something that humans would consider like aesthetically pleasing. So it's like, I mean, it's safe for them, but at the same time, it does place them away from like humans and humans being able to understand them.
I think the Thestrals are kind of like a mythological version of creatures like ravens and crows and even vultures, that they're creatures of death, and people don't like to be reminded about death. They don't like, it's just, ooh, that's yucky. But they have their uses, and the Thestrals certainly come in useful here. But animals aspect, and I think it's both wonderful that humans in Harry Potter and in mythology and Joseph Campbell and all that stuff can say, oh, the owl is a symbol of wisdom and the snake is a symbol of either medicine or deceit or whatever. And it's great that we have those things, but we also, I think, especially this group, recognizes that's an oversimplification to say that a vulture is the creature of death. I am? Well, if you were the vulture, you might be kind of ticked off. Same thing with the owl. I'm only a creature of wisdom. Apparently owls are actually not very bright in terms of birds. Crows and ravens are very smart. Owls are not so smart, but they're a creature of Athena, and so therefore they're given this mantle of being that. And then people just play as, oh, the owl is a creature of wisdom. And if you slap a label on an animal like a thestral, as we see in the books, that gives you no depth. Then you stop right at that label and you never look past it to see what the thestral really is. You only think of it as a creature of death, and then you run away. So yeah, that's a speciesization as well, is to just oversimplify what a creature is.
Very well put. Lydia, you had something to say?
Yeah, thanks. Now I have to remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah, I think that Harry's interactions with the Thestrals also like speaks to his even if he doesn't know it or speak it, his innate desire to connect with other living beings. Like we see this as early as Sorcerer's Stone, where he relates to the snake who's in captivity. Mm-hmm. So he has this throughout there's this running theme throughout the series, and he has the connection with the Thestrals because he himself is a symbol of death in the series and is very closely intertwined with it. And even though he doesn't realize it, he he knows he's drawn to it. I think that's like a beautiful way to connect species, because I mean, it's kind of like what people have been saying, but all species experience death. It's like the one thing that we all have. I mean, it's one of the things that we have in common. And so to have it be kind of like filtered down to that one thing that relates them is really powerful.
Good points.
Yeah, very good point.
Have you guys talked about pest removal? I guess I'll use that. When I first started taking my notes and sort of re-listening to this book, so much of the time is spent at number 12 Grimmauld Place trying to clean it up because it's full of all sorts of nasty stuff. But you know, for instance, they're spraying the doxies. They take the doxies, they throw them in a bag, and you're never really sure exactly what they do with the doxies, other than Fred and George grabbing a few because they have some mercantile use for doxy poison or whatever it is for something funny that they're doing. But then you can look at okay, so is Ms. Weasley basically saying put all the doxies into a trash bag like unwanted kittens and throwing them into the garbage? I don't know. Or do they vanish them later? I don't know. And Fred and George, after they take their hidden and stolen doxies, do they extract the poison and then I don't know. You know, so it's interesting about that the pest removal business there, because you talked about sentience, and you know, if you're truly strict, that you would say I don't even want to hurt an ant or a mosquito or a, you know, my wife will catch mosquitoes and carry them outside because she doesn't want to hurt the mosquito. That's the level she goes to. And yet you have mosquitoes, and you might say in terms of sentience, you have doxies, which seem to be kind of fairy-like and somewhat human. And when do you start treating a creature with humanity, and when do you just step on it, or do you step on it at all in the wizarding world? And could you run a vegan pest control agency that used stupefy, and then you grabbed everybody and you put them into a bag and you brought them to the Forbidden Forest? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about how you could do number 12 Grimmauld Place cleansing in a different way.
That's really interesting. I keep bringing up Protego cast, and so listen to Protego cast season 2. But we're planning on doing an episode on pest control and talking about like doxies, and then like the denoming that they do in like the garden and stuff, and then about boggarts and all of that, because Tyler has a lot of strong feelings about boggarts, and we've learned a lot, I think, in conversations about them. And then in our content, one of our content creators, Vicky, she talks a lot about the like denoming and stuff, and like stupefying them, and, you know, painting them gold and having them like on the Christmas tree and all of that. And then so Nicole said Parth's idea. So we talked about it on the Discord, and I think Parth brought that up also in our Discord discussion, that we want to talk about that in the episode. So definitely listen to that. And then super kind of side note, I was like gazing around my room as we were having this discussion, and I have these, I don't know if you can, let me take off my virtual background. I have these like art prints that I got on Etsy that are like herbology, and then like pretty drawings and stuff. And I just looked at this one, and it's herbology, but it says sentient being right there for leaping toadstools. And so I looked them up, and on fandom like wiki, it says that they are, they can be used in ingredients, potion making and all of that, but it says they are sentient mushrooms, which had the ability to jump. And I just think I'm going to look more into that while we're not on this, but it says the first appearance was in chapter 14 of Chamber of Secrets. It says it on here. So I'm going to go back and look at that. And maybe we'll discuss that next time. But I was just looking around, and I saw the word sentient being on my herbology thing, and I was like, whoa. So
that's like the discussion that we've had before, like with the mandrakes, like, are they beings? Like, are they sentient? But they're also plants. Like,
yeah.
We saw it in this book too with the screech sap too, or screech snap seedlings. Susan Bones, I think, was migrating some like dragon dung or dragon fertilizer onto the seedlings, and the author made a note that they were like screeching and squirming in protest or discomfort. And I was like, dang, that brings me back to like the mandrake conversation we've had before.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so in part 1 of our last book club, we definitely talked more about the doxies. And I think we started talking about like similar to how like if a mouse or a rat gets in your house and the way that people react. But I feel like as far as the doxies go, like that house had been uninhabited but for like a decade or something. So the doxies are just living their life in the curtains. They're really not hurting anyone. I think they could have easily managed to let them have their space, and then also just the humans have their space and like, you know, respect each other. The fact that it didn't say that they killed them. I like to think that they relocated them somewhere. Even if it was like a different room, that like stay in the attic, just don't come down. I like to hope that they allowed them to continue living, or maybe they just released them outside or something. But the way they went about it was a little bit violent. Just stuffing them in a bucket, like all on top of each other and everything. They didn't really seem to have much respect for the doxies.
And Fred and George even less so, because of the fact that they're like,
Yeah.
oh, let's just experiment on these creatures too.
Yeah,
Like,
same with
in the chat that said, oh yeah, Nicole, finding out that Weasley's wizard wheezes wasn't cruelty free caused a Fred and George identity crisis. Like, yeah. Yeah, very well said.
and sending a group of unwilling teenagers is not the way to get some caring pest control. Very true. Same for like everything at Hogwarts, like allowing kids to perform spells on animals and try to take care of animals and care of magical creatures is just, you shouldn't trust children to like.
It's also like it's the adult influence though, because like the adults are saying like this is okay. Like kids don't grow up thinking like, oh, I see this pig, like yum, you know, like kids would be like, oh, like cute piggy, you know, and then when you grow up, you're told over and over again that like this is just the way of the world. And so kids are going to make mistakes. They're going to make these decisions based on like, you know, the outside input in the environments in which they grow up. But then they're also not going to think ahead the same way that like an adult might think ahead about like the pain and like the sentience necessarily. So it's weird because like yes and no, I think for that.
Yeah, no, you're completely 100%. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the timeline is sort of flippity floppity, as you guys were putting forth in the Fantastic Beasts films. There's obviously a lot more empathy shown towards creatures by Eddie Redmayne's character, and so in terms of our world progression, you have the 90s Harry Potter books, and then you have the more recent Fantastic Beasts films. So you could see a progression to become more empathic. But if you look at historically speaking, Newt Scamander is happening back in the 30s, 20s. So they have this great sort of icon of caring for animals, who writes this landmark book because he cared about creatures in ways that the wizarding world didn't. It becomes a very important textbook used in Hogwarts, and yet nobody's really embodying the same empathy that he embodied. So they got the information, but they didn't get the heart, even though it's almost 100 years later.
For sure. That's a great point. That's so fascinating. And I think that it's kind of a like inconsistency, or I don't know the word, but if you read the Fantastic Beasts book that was published more like while the Harry Potter books were being published.
You mean this one?
Yes. I have the little red one, the little flimsy one. So he does kind of open the book talking about caring about creatures, but for like every creature's description, he lists what they're used for. And I feel like
it's almost a different Newt.
Completely. And
that
he was
that book.
Yeah, he was
written in the films.
Written for the films completely differently in a good way. So I like to think that maybe over time, before Newt Scamander passed away, he would, because there are always like new editions of like books. So I would like to think that the newest edition of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, he took all of that out and replaced it with like just more information about the creatures and why you shouldn't handle them and like where they should live and why you should respect them and everything. So
Yeah, I think we discussed that in one, question about like, would Newt be vegan or would Fantastic Beasts, like the textbook, be the way it is? And I think that if it were written now, or if like Newt were to go back and like change it, I think you would see the development, like the evolution of like the way that we talk about animals. And he would definitely be on that sort of, everyone's learning. And I think that he would have learned a lot while working with them. And then he would kind of rework that, the language, which he uses to speak about animals. And
yeah, so time is pretty much up. So unless anyone had any other extra things they wanted to bring up that we didn't get to, because there's always so much, feel free to bring that up now.
Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate
Yeah.
the discussion and hearing what people had to say about this.
Yeah, so glad that you joined.
Definitely. I don't know if you do Discord at all, but we have fun conversations on our Discord. And well, Valerie or Catherine will talk more about
I just
that.
shared it in the chat.
Oh, you shared?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, please join. It's a great place. It's not like, I know a lot of Discords have like a million people and are like, you can't keep up with it, but I feel like we have a good, like, smaller amount of people, and we talk about animals in the wizarding world, kind of like this. We just keep expanding on it, and then we, talk about random stuff too.
Yeah, are you just doing audio, or are you doing video as well, or?
On Discord, it's mainly we just type. We do have like a voice chat, and you can do video. And when you join, you can tell us what your Hogwarts house is, and then you get to be in your house, and you have your own special like common room where you can like talk just to your house, and you can chat on voice chat with them if you want to. So it's kind of just like whatever everyone wants to do. Yeah, so feel free to join that. And the only last thing I was going to say about this book, kind of what we keep bringing up, is just like, what would it be like if it was written today? And I think there are just a lot of like descriptive words used that aren't necessary and could easily be changed, like leather-bound books and silk cushions and wool hats. So like those could easily be swapped out for a different material. But there are just so many animal-centric descriptive like materials and everything used. So I would love to, which will never happen, but I would love to read this book revised as cruelty-free, animal-free.
What a fun project that would be. Maybe once I'm done with my thesis, I'll rewrite Harry Potter like as a vegan text and like make everything like
just like
tofu. Yeah, like everything's like a tofurkey dinner or something, and just like
exactly.
That would be fun.
All the stay the same.
Can we talk about Anime Guy next time? Yes. Yes,
For sure.
yes.
For sure.
Definitely.
Join and be sure to bring it up. Absolutely.
Yeah, these book clubs never get, like, we never get everything we want to talk about because there's just so much. But
well, the books are so long. It's just like you
Yeah.
won't get to everything.
Yeah. But it's great. We go off on tangents and it's really interesting. And thank you everyone for your questions that you brought up today and your input. It was a lot of fun and always great to have new people too, because we get new perspectives. So thank you everyone so much for joining, and we hope you'll join us next time.